Hello and welcome to our webinar, An Introduction to ISO 22716, the International Cosmetics Standard. Our speaker for today is Melanie Blackmore, Managing Director of Blackmores. Melanie is a Chartered Quality Professional, Chair of the Chartered Quality Institute UK's Regional Committee. A thought leader in her field, Melanie has been invited to present in Asia and Europe on quality, energy and environmental management standards. Melanie has been involved with the creation, development and implementation of British and international standards for over 17 years. With her passion for improving business performance through the implementation of management systems, Melanie founded her first business in 2006, Blackmores, which is now a leader in ISO standards consultancy in the UK. Before we move on to the presentation, I will just give you a brief introduction to Blackmores and why we are passionate about raising standards. Blackmores provides knowledge and expertise on implementing and maintaining international standards and have developed a reputation as the leading ISO management systems consultancy firm in the UK. Being thought leaders in our field, Blackmores are an award-winning organisation with a 100% success rate for helping clients achieve certification across Europe, Middle East and Asia. Due to our knowledge and experience of international standards, we're in the fortunate position of being able to cherry-pick from standards the best practice needed to suit each individual client's needs. These standards can range from quality to environmental and health and safety standards. One particular standard that is driving momentum at present is the International Cosmetic Standard ISO 22716. An increasing number of cosmetic organisations in Europe are implementing ISO 22716 to comply with the new European Cosmetic Regulation EC number 1223, coming into effect in July 2013. The introduction of ISO 22716 pioneers a globally recognised quality standard for cosmetic products. However, other benefits can also be derived in addition to legal compliance. To tell you more about this interesting subject, I will now hand you over to our speaker for today's webinar, Melanie Blackmore.
Hello, thank you Rachel. As a result of the demand for higher standards, the European Union has introduced a cosmetics regulation to ensure that the industry meets the highest standards of quality and safe cosmetic products. The webinar today is going to look more closely at this EC Cosmetic Regulation, which is number 1223, and also how ISO 22716 can help to comply with this EC regulation, and explain a little bit about why it's been introduced, the impact on the cosmetics industry, and we'll look at some of the key requirements of the standard also. I'll explain about the benefits, both the internal benefits of the organisation and the external benefits affecting stakeholders. And finally, we'll look at some considerations for implementation of ISO 22716, whether you're just looking to implement a more robust quality management system to comply with these requirements, or indeed if you wish to go for certification to ISO 22716. The importance of protecting and enhancing the safety and quality of consumer products in the cosmetics industry cannot be stressed enough. It is no secret that the cosmetics industry is dominated by the importance of physical appearance and personal well-being. This fact makes the underlying processes and standards that ensure the safety and quality of your brands is absolutely vital to cultivating loyal consumers. As experience shows, it only takes one weak link in the supply chain or a slight quality defect to cause skin or health problems for the consumer, and consequently severely damage a brand's reputation. Despite the recession in recent years, we have seen a rise in demand for cosmetics, A report published in 2010 reported that the global personal care industry is set to reach €487 billion by 2017. Europe is traditionally the leading market in cosmetics, representing nearly half of the global market. Europe is also the world's largest cosmetic exporter, with 62% of its cosmetic products being marketed outside of Europe. However, as consumer demand grows, so does consumer demand for high-quality products. As a result of the demand for higher standards, the EU has introduced a cosmetics regulation to ensure that the industry meets the highest standards of quality and safe cosmetic products. Replacing the existing EU Cosmetic Directive, which was 76/768 EEC, from July 2013, the new Cosmetic Regulation EC number 1223/2009 aims to streamline and modernise the legislation currently in place for cosmetics and personal care products across Europe. Products complying with the new regulation may be placed on the market prior to the 11th of July 2013, and an explanatory note on the transitional period is available from the European Commission, and I've provided a link here. The provisions of the regulation aim at ensuring that consumers' health is protected and that they are well informed by monitoring the composition and labelling of products. The regulation also provides for the assessment of product safety and the prohibition of animal testing. So who is the regulation applicable to? Well, all participants in the cosmetics product chain in Europe and non-European countries, which are going to be covered. This includes ingredients producers, products final assemblers, distributors, and importers and exporters. Every cosmetic product circulating onto the European market will have to be produced according to the good manufacturing practices. This applies to goods processed in the EU 27 countries, as well as for all imported cosmetics. Other requirements include an increased responsibility of producers and distributors, particularly regarding ingredients toxicity, product labelling, a more comprehensive product file, and compulsory notification of new product introduction to the European Commission. Other countries where the cosmetics market is well developed are also on the way to implementing good manufacturing practices as a compulsory requirement to enter their market. So how does ISO 22716 support compliance to EC 1223? Well, on the 21st of April 2011, ISO 22716 officially became the European standard of GMP, that's good manufacturing practices, for cosmetics products. And organisations must be compliant with the requirements of the EC 1223 and in effect ISO 22716, as this is a tool for compliance to the standard, by the 11th of July 2013. So it's not too far away now. So what is ISO 22716? ISO 22716 is an international standard of best practice specifically for the cosmetics industry. ISO 22716 offers a solid foundation for ensuring quality and safety and enables manufacturers, suppliers, retailers and wholesalers to minimise or eliminate incidents of contaminations, mix-ups and other errors by controlling all the components that can affect product quality. ISO 22716 deals with all aspects of the supply chain of cosmetics products, from the early delivery of raw materials and components until the shipment of the final product to the consumer. Good manufacturing practices follow the principles of sound scientific judgment and risk assessment to produce products that meet defined characteristics. In addition, the standard is relevant for retailers, brand holders and wholesalers of cosmetics products. Furthermore, it specifies general requirements for quality management systems by incorporating a risk assessment-based approach to define critical and non-critical elements, ensuring high-quality supply chain operations. A quality management system compliant to ISO 22716 will provide an effective mechanism for risk management. The principles of the standard are based on the concept of hazard analysis and critical control points, otherwise known as HACCP. So the cosmetics GMP is embodied by a number of variables, such as the analysis of all possible risks in an organisation through effective risk assessments, the identification of critical steps to control those risks, and to continuously improve the product quality and the safety of those products as well, and defining the change control at various stages of the product life cycle to safeguard the product. Now, for those organisations that already have a quality management system in place, this is good news, as documentation is required in the form of documented policies and procedures, and also, of course, records to demonstrate evidence of compliance. And finally, internal inspections and preparations, for example, for corrective and preventive actions, are also required, which help to reduce risk across the organisation through having CAPA programs in place. So what are the key components of ISO 22716? Unfortunately, we haven't got time to go through all of the requirements in detail. However, I'd just like to provide a summary for you today. It covers the raw materials, the buildings in which the products are manufactured. Of course, the personnel are extremely important in this process. Identification of critical stage procedures, the working environment, looking at health and hygiene and quality of the work environment, the packaging material that's used and labelling, etc. And of course, looking at equipment and maintenance and management of that, and finally the distribution of your products. So what I've done is I've broken this down into 5 core elements, which I'm going to briefly take you through over the next 5 minutes or so. This includes the cosmetics quality management system and the organisation itself, the premises and equipment, product realisation and materials management. Now, product realisation, for those of you already certified to ISO 9001, will recognise this terminology. For those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is basically the operations within your manufacturing plant. Deviations, complaints and recalls, and finally, continuous improvement. So first of all, we'll start by looking at the cosmetics quality management systems in the organisation. Setting up effective internal and external communication channels has to be the top priority of management to ensure the participation and commitment of personnel at all levels of the organisation. So a controlled quality management system is therefore an intrinsic part of an organisation working towards ISO 22716. Cosmetics good manufacturing practices can only be delivered when focusing on establishing and maintaining a qualified personnel base that is well trained and capable of consistently producing safe products. A sound knowledge base of the personnel in a cosmetics manufacturing organisation is of the utmost importance, and this area is receiving serious attention within the quality guidance as a standard. Another crucial element is a clear description of tasks and lines of responsibilities of all personnel within the organisation. So moving on to premises and equipment, a proper design of areas for manufacturing, storage, quality control is a key element and is also well described within the standard, which is very helpful. Areas should be fit for purpose to allow for proper access and flow of materials. And there should be clear segregation of manufacturing and storage activities and proper cleaning and sanitation, and because they're vitally important to avoid the occurrence of any mix-ups and potentially cross-contamination. Still on the subject of premises and equipment, scheduled maintenance of premises and equipment and frequent calibration of monitoring devices have to be organised in the facilities in order to perform tasks according to the defined and preset parameters of manufacturing, packaging and storage. Within all of these aspects, the quality unit of the organisation needs to be heavily involved to approve and evaluate all changes that occur and allow for an objective overview of results obtained. So moving on to the operations and materials management, so this is the product realisation section. Any organisation working under ISO 22716 has to set criteria for quality during the different stages of manufacturing, like specifications for purchased raw materials, components and packaging materials. The criteria for process checks should also be established and release parameters of the starting materials, intermediaries as well as the finished products. Now unfortunately, we live in the real world and mistakes do happen, unfortunately, so invariably there will be product recalls potentially, even though obviously we can do all that we can to prevent these. So each organisation needs to have a system in place to deal with deviations occurring anywhere in the supply chain of operations, and this needs to be extremely transparent. These deviations can have multiple origins and occur internally, but also arise externally, for example, during transportation to a client organisation. Organisations need to have the ability to raise complaints if necessary, and the organisation compliance to ISO 22716 quality regime should investigate these complaints until a satisfactory solution has been found and communicated back to the client. In case of serious quality deviations posing a serious threat to consumer health and safety, the organisation needs to be able to coordinate an effective recall of the product or products. So moving on to continuous improvement, which is it's based on that the ISO standard is based on the principles of continual improvement, as is all other ISO standards. If you are familiar with other ISO standards such as ISO 9001, the quality standard, or ISO 14001, the environmental standard, and this standard is no exception. Continual improvement is at the core of the standard, so therefore it's an extremely beneficial business improvement tool, as well as being a compliance tool to the EC regulation. So one of the fundamental requirements is to audit your management system, and our approach to auditing is not just a tick box exercise, but it's about best practice, about ensuring that employees are familiar with their requirements, the tasks and their responsibilities, and ensuring that the system is operating efficiently and effectively. So the internal audit is an intrinsic part of the Cosmetics GMP, and it really does help you to optimise the management of your processes if you audit this correctly. But of course, not every company is perfect. There will be opportunities for improvement, and so therefore the quality management system helps you to implement systems for corrective action and preventive action, so that you can prevent those issues from reoccurring in the future, and you can learn from those lessons. And at the end of the day, it helps you to embed a culture of quality throughout the supply chain. So we'll now look at some of the benefits of complying to ISO 22716 and EC 1223. From the consumer's point of view, Cosmetics GMP works in the background and provides them with peace of mind. It ensures that the products they use are meeting the highest standards of quality that they expect, and reinforces their loyalty and trust in their preferred brands. From the point of view of manufacturers, suppliers, retailers or wholesalers, Cosmetics GMP also provides confidence. It does so by ensuring that products meet all of the applicable legal requirements and quality and safety standards. Ultimately, applying Cosmetics GMP protects brand reputation. However, there are many more business benefits of compliance to ISO 22716 that have an impact both internally and externally. So first of all, I'd just like to talk through a couple of the internal benefits. I've already mentioned about ISO 9001. Well, the GMP allows you to seamlessly integrate the requirements of ISO 22716 and the EC standard into one holistic framework for quality management. It allows for easy implementation then within the organisation, and it doesn't really matter about the size of the organisation or the complexity of it. It helps you to provide that foundation internally for your business operations. It helps to foster legal compliance within the organisation, as we know that there are many, not only statutory requirements that cosmetics organisations need to comply with, but also there are a lot of regulations as well, and this is probably only going to increase in future years. It helps to control and reduce hazards internally, and therefore reducing risk. And finally, promotes a culture of continuous improvement across the organisation. Looking at the external business benefits of ISO 22716, it helps to form an internationally accepted basis in the cosmetics products and supply chain. When ISO 22716 was created, it was created from an amalgamation of several countries across the world and leading experts in the cosmetics industry, and it is now deemed as best practice in this particular area. So those organisations that are looking to achieve certification to the standard will undoubtedly experience sales and marketing opportunities and be exposed to potentially new markets, and also obviously it can help to retain existing clients. And this is because the organisations that are complying with ISO 22716 can demonstrate credibility, commitment and also confidence to stakeholders. And that isn't just obviously from the internal point of view but externally as well. It can help to demonstrate a commitment to quality and health and safety to all of your stakeholders. Okay, so I'd just like to close by looking at some of the considerations when implementing ISO 22716. Now that we have reviewed the EC 1223 regulation and the ISO 22716 standard, you're probably already considering how your organisation currently complies with these requirements. In fact, your organisation may already be fully compliant or even partially compliant. Either way, I'm just going to talk through some of the key considerations when reviewing your readiness for compliance to the EC regulation and ISO 22716. So first of all, you might want to consider purchasing a copy of the standard, ISO 22716. It's a good read, it's very informative, and obviously it's going to tell you all of the details of the standard. So that is a good starting point. We provide a copy of the standard with our starter pack for any new ISO 22716 projects, but you can order these from the ISO website, and I'll provide the link for that shortly. You need to review or even create your organisation chart, look at the various functions within the organisation and identify who is responsible for various tasks and activities within the business. You need to think about the flow of materials throughout the product life cycle and across the organisation. And think about how you manage risk, not only internally but across your supply chain as well. So looking at your risk assessment methodology, your processes for that, is it adequate? So it's going to be very useful to compare your current processes and methodology against the requirements of this international standard of best practice. You also need to think about what processes you currently have in place for maintaining your plants and equipment, and looking at whether any records are produced to actually demonstrate evidence that your systems and your machinery is well maintained. If there was a request for you to provide an audit trail on the evidence of maintenance of your plant and equipment. And you also need to look at how you can identify very quickly any product defects, or ideally looking at preventative methods to prevent any product defects, and but also how you deal with product recalls if it comes to that. So that's just a starting point for some of those key considerations. Many organisations start by actually having a gap analysis carried out on site at their premises. This is a service that we offer. Basically what we would do is look at your current policies and procedures and your operating processes actually on site, because what we find is that sometimes well, best case scenario, a company has a quality and health and safety management system, but in some cases business operations are working extremely well. However, the procedures may not necessarily be documented or formalised. So basically what we do is we look to identify those existing processes that are in place, whether they're documented or not, and we help to produce a report which identifies the strengths and the weaknesses of your current operations in line with the EC's regulation and also ISO 22716. So that then helps you to deduce exactly what tasks are required moving forward, and that helps you to set a path for continual improvement for compliance with these requirements. Some organisations also engage in the services of a consultant to provide assistance, and again this is where we can help by holding your hand through the process right through to the assessment stage if that's where you wish to go, and even to continue to carry out audits after the assessment. I mentioned about some of those useful links earlier. Our website will have a copy of the webinar available hopefully tomorrow. The ISO.org website is where you can purchase copies of standards, and the Europa website has information on that mentioned about that transition period and further information about the EC regulations. And finally, we're going to be producing an e-learning course which should be available from the 18th of July on 22716. So I hope that's been really helpful for you and informative. And I'd like to thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar and for listening. And I'm now going to hand you over to Rachel, who I believe may have some questions for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mel. That was a fantastic webinar, and yes, indeed, we have had a number of questions from delegates during the webinar. So what I'll do is I'll just go through those. One question that was asked by a number of delegates, obviously the deadline is fast approaching. They asked what happens if they're not complying with EC Regulation 1223 by the 11th of July.
Right, okay, well, I know that many organisations will be on their way to complying with it, so I think providing that that work is being undertaken, then that should be satisfactory for the time being. But there is some guidance on the transition period that has been published, and that was on one of my previous slides, so hopefully I've covered that. If those attendees to the webinar can click on that link, that provides a lot more information about the transition period.
Excellent, okay. There was a lot of interest in actually getting certified to ISO 22716. So a couple of questions. How do we do this, first of all? And secondly, what is involved with the assessment?
Right, okay. Well, in order to be registered and to actually apply for certification to ISO 22716, you need to contact an accredited certification body. As far as I'm aware, SGS are offering certification to ISO 22716. What is involved with the assessment? It's similar to other ISO assessments if an organisation has been through that process before. For those that haven't, basically the assessment is done in two stages. The first stage is a document review. So an assessor will ask you for a copy of a policy, for example, that is stipulated within the standard, and you simply show that. Right, that's it. That's a bit of a tick box exercise, really. But the next stage of the assessment is really where cosmetics organisations will get a lot of value, and that is where the assessor will be digging down deep into looking at, if you say that you operate in a certain way, or you say that you provide training, they'll expect to see evidence of that. So they'll expect to see evidence of training records, maintenance logs of your machinery, if that's what you say you do. So yeah, it's a very useful exercise, and at the end of that, hopefully the assessor will say, congratulations, you've been recommended for certification to ISO 22716, but then they have to forward their report onto their head office, I believe, and so it's actually a few weeks after that that you can formally declare and shout out from the rooftops that you passed and you're certified to the standard.
And another question we had was, how long does it typically take to implement 22716?
Well, it's a little bit like saying, how long is a piece of string, really. It really does depend on the organisation's readiness to the standard already. But so if we looked at a company that already had a quality management system in place, or even a health and safety system, and then it doesn't necessarily need to be compliant to 9001, but that would also help. Quite a lot of the foundations of the EC regulation and 22716 will be covered. Generally, we find that the main gaps are on the operations and materials management, and also on corrective and preventive action. And so there's quite often a piece of work involved there. But if the company hasn't got a quality management system in place, it may not be a bad thing, because sometimes it's easier to start from scratch and use the the requirements of this international best practice standard as your foundation for establishing those policies and procedures within the business. So I guess in terms of timescales, it could be anything from a minimum of 1 month just to update the system so it's compliant, through to 12 months really. If you're going to go for an assessment, you need to allow at least 4 months, because you need to have about 3 months of evidence of internal audits.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you may have already answered my next question, but we had a question from one delegate who said, we already have ISO 9001 in place. Is there much more work involved to comply with 22716?
Obviously not as much as those businesses that haven't got 9001. But yes, I would say it depends on how mature your quality management system is, and whether it is actually embedded across the organisation's culture and how effective it is. I think if that is the case, then you should be at least halfway there to achieving 22716.
Oh, well, that's good news. Okay. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you ever so much to everyone who's attended today. There will be a very short survey at the end of the presentation. There's just 3 questions, and it actually helps with the Blackmores ISO 9001 system if you're able to give us some feedback on the webinar today. As Mel mentioned earlier in the webinar, we will be putting a recording of today's session onto the website, and that will be available hopefully in the next day or so. And also, if you want me to email you a link to that, then please do email me. So that's it for the webinar, and all is left to say is enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.